My 5-year-old daughter drew a picture of our family, and there was a man I didn't recognize standing in the window behind us. It was a Tuesday afternoon, nothing special about it. Lily had just come home from preschool with a folder full of artwork. She was so proud of herself, bouncing on her toes as she pulled out a drawing she'd made during class. "Look, Mommy, I drew us," she said, sliding the paper across the kitchen table. I smiled and looked at the picture. There we were in crayon, 3 figures standing in what was clearly our living room, me with my brown hair, Lily with her pigtails, baby Oscar in his little blue onesie. It was sweet and messy and exactly the kind of thing I would hang on the refrigerator. But then I noticed the 4th figure. In the corner of the drawing, inside what looked like a window frame, there was a man. He was drawn in black and brown crayon, with a round head, 2 dark circles for eyes, and a straight line for a mouth. He wasn't smiling. He was just standing there, watching. "Lily, who is this?" I asked, pointing at the figure. She looked at me like I was being silly. "That's the man who watches us, Mommy." My stomach dropped. "What man?" "The night man," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "He comes to the window when it's dark. Sometimes he waves at me." I couldn't breathe. I told myself she was imagining things, mixing up dreams with reality the way kids sometimes do. But something about the way she said it, so calm, so certain, made my skin crawl. That night, after I put both kids to bed, I opened the security camera app on my phone. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself there was nothing to find. I was wrong. At 3:17 a.m., 2 nights earlier, a figure appeared on the footage. A man in dark clothing, walking slowly along the side of my house. He stopped at Lily's bedroom window. He stood there for almost 10 minutes, completely still, his face inches from the glass. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows between houses. I scrolled back further. He was there 3 nights before that, and a week before that, and the week before that. For at least a month, a man had been coming to my daughter's window in the middle of the night, watching her sleep, and she had been watching him back. Subscribe for more stories and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Jenna Hollis. I'm 31 years old, a single mother of 2, living in a quiet neighborhood in Dayton, Ohio. My daughter Lily is 5 years old, full of energy and imagination. My son Oscar just turned 2. He's still learning words and figuring out how to run without falling over. Our life isn't glamorous, but it's ours, and I've worked hard to make it feel safe. I divorced Lily's father, Derek, 3 years ago. He moved to Arizona right after the papers were signed and barely stays in touch. Birthday cards arrive late. Phone calls happen maybe twice a year. Child support checks show up when they feel like it. I stopped counting on him a long time ago. Oscar's father was a short relationship that ended before I even knew I was pregnant. He wanted nothing to do with being a dad, and honestly, I didn't fight him on it. Some battles aren't worth the energy, so it's just us. Me and my 2 kids against the world. We live in a 3-bedroom house at the end of a cul-de-sac. It's a modest place with a small backyard and a garage I mostly use for storage. The neighborhood is the kind where people wave at each other when they're getting the mail. Kids ride bikes on the sidewalk. Dogs bark at squirrels. Nothing exciting ever happens here, and that's exactly why I chose it. My mother, Rena, lives about 20 minutes away. She comes over twice a week to help with the kids, and usually stays for dinner. She's been my rock since the divorce, never judging, never pushing, just showing up whenever I need her. My younger brother, Tomas, lives across town. He's 27, works construction, and handles all the small repairs around my house that I can't figure out myself. He's the one who installed my security cameras last year, after a few packages got stolen from porches in the neighborhood. My neighbor across the street is a retired woman named Dolores. She's in her 70s, lives alone, and treats my kids like honorary grandchildren. She brings over casseroles at least once a week and always waves at Lily when we're playing in the front yard. I like knowing she's watching, even if she's just being nosy. It makes me feel less alone. I work from home as a medical billing specialist. It's not exciting, but it pays the bills and lets me be present for my kids. Lily goes to preschool 3 mornings a week at a little church program 10 minutes away. Oscar naps in the afternoon, while I work at my desk in the corner of the living room. Evenings are dinner, bath time, stories, and bed by 8. It's a routine, and I've learned to love routines. They make everything feel predictable and safe. Lily has always been creative. She draws constantly, filling up notebooks with pictures of unicorns, castles, dragons, and our family doing various activities. She has imaginary friends with elaborate backstories. She talks to her stuffed animals like they're real people with real feelings. So when she first mentioned the Nightman a few weeks ago, I didn't think much of it. "Mommy, the Nightman was at my window again," she said one morning at breakfast. "Oh yeah?" I said, only half listening as I poured her cereal. "What did he want?" "He was just looking. He always just looks." I assumed she was dreaming. Kids have vivid imaginations, especially at that age. I kissed her forehead and told her there was no Nightman, that it was just a dream, that she was safe. She shrugged and went back to her cereal, and I forgot about it by lunchtime. But she kept mentioning him, once a week, maybe twice. Always casual, always matter of fact. The Nightman waved at me last night. The Nightman had a hat on. The Nightman stayed longer this time. I should have paid attention sooner. I should have asked more questions. But I was tired and busy and convinced that my daughter was just going through a phase. Then she drew that picture, the one with our family in the living room and the man in the window behind us. And suddenly, all those casual mentions didn't seem so innocent anymore. I remember sitting at the kitchen table that evening, staring at Lily's drawing while she colored in another book beside me. Oscar was in his high chair, smashing banana slices with his fists. It was such a normal moment, but all I could see was that figure in the window, those 2 dark circles for eyes, and my daughter's calm voice saying he watches us every night. I had to know if it was real. I had to know if someone was actually there. That night, after both kids were asleep, I sat on the couch with my phone and opened the security app. The cameras covered the front door, the backyard, and the driveway. They didn't cover Lily's window directly, but one of them caught part of the side yard. I started with that night's footage. Nothing. The motion sensor hadn't triggered. I went back to the night before. Still nothing. Then I went back 2 nights, to the early morning hours when Lily had mentioned the Nightman waving at her. At 3:17 a.m., the motion sensor activated. A figure walked into frame from the direction of the street. He moved slowly, staying close to the fence, heading toward the back of the house, toward Lily's window. The camera angle only showed him from behind, but I could see he was wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low. He stopped just outside the frame, right where Lily's window would be. He stayed there for 10 minutes. I watched the timestamp tick forward, second by second, while this man stood in my yard in the middle of the night. Then he walked back the way he came and disappeared. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. I went back further, 3 nights earlier. The same thing. A week before that. And again, and again, and again. Someone had been watching my daughter for weeks. And I was just now finding out. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with every light in the house turned on, scrolling through weeks of security footage, watching the same man appear over and over again. Sometimes he stayed for 5 minutes. Sometimes he stayed for 20. Once, he brought something with him, a small folding chair, and sat in my yard for almost an hour, just sitting there in the dark, facing my daughter's window. The next morning, I went outside to look at the ground beneath Lily's window. The soil was soft from recent rain, and what I found made me sick. Footprints, dozens of them, overlapping, pressed deep into the mud. Some were fresher than others. This wasn't a one-time thing. Someone had been standing in this exact spot, night after night, for weeks, maybe longer. I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within the hour, a man and a woman, both polite and professional. They looked at the footage on my phone. They examined the footprints. They walked around the perimeter of the house and wrote everything down in their notebooks. I told them about Lily mentioning the Nightman for weeks. I told them about the drawing. I showed them the chair footage. When I finished, the male officer closed his notebook and looked at me with something like sympathy. "Ma'am, I understand this is frightening," he said, "but technically, no crime has been committed. He hasn't entered your home. He hasn't made threats. He hasn't damaged property. Standing in someone's yard isn't illegal unless there's a posted no trespassing sign. I stared at him. A man has been watching my 5-year-old daughter sleep for a month. How is that not a crime? We can file a report, the female officer said, and if he comes back, you should call us right away. But unless he escalates, there's not much we can do. They suggested I install better lighting. They suggested I put up no trespassing signs. They suggested I consider a restraining order if I could identify the man. Then they left, and I stood in my driveway feeling more helpless than I ever had in my life. That afternoon, I started paying closer attention to everyone in the neighborhood. I watched cars drive past. I noticed who was outside and when. I looked at people I had lived near for 2 years with completely new eyes. That's when I noticed Glenn Whitmore. Glenn lived 4 houses down, in a beige ranch-style house with overgrown bushes and a rusted truck in the driveway. He had moved in about 2 months ago, right around the time Lily first mentioned the night man. I had never really talked to him. He kept to himself, didn't attend the neighborhood block party, and always seemed to be outside doing yard work at random times of day. I started watching him more carefully. I noticed he was often in his front yard when Lily and Oscar were playing outside. He would rake the same patch of grass for an hour, glancing in our direction every few minutes. Once, I saw him standing at the end of his driveway, just staring at our house. When he caught me looking, he went inside without a word. I went back through my security footage with fresh eyes. The build was right, the height matched. The way the man walked, slightly hunched with his hands in his pockets, looked exactly like Glenn. I couldn't see his face clearly in any of the clips, but I was almost certain it was him. Knowing who it might be made everything worse. Every time I saw Glenn's car drive past, I felt my chest tighten. Every time I spotted him outside, I wondered if he was planning his next visit. I started closing all the blinds as soon as the sun went down. I checked the locks on every door and window 3 times before bed. Lily noticed something was wrong. "Mommy, why do you keep looking outside?" she asked. One evening, while I stood at the kitchen window, watching the street. "I'm just making sure everything is okay, baby. Is the night man coming tonight?" I turned around and knelt in front of her. "No one is coming. I promise. Mommy is going to keep you safe." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. 5 years old, and she was already learning that the world wasn't always safe. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom. Instead, I dragged a chair into the hallway between the kids' rooms and sat there every night with a kitchen knife on the table beside me. I dozed in short bursts, waking at every sound, checking my phone constantly for motion alerts from the cameras. My mother noticed the change in me within days. "Jenna, you look exhausted," she said when she came over to watch the kids. "What's going on?" I told her everything. The footage, the footprints, the police visit, my suspicions about Glenn. Her face went pale, and she pulled me into a hug. "You can't stay here," she said. "Bring the kids and come stay with me. If I leave, he wins. And what if he follows us? What if he finds out where you live? Then what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this, waiting for something terrible to happen. I needed to do something. I just didn't know what yet. The breaking point came 6 days after I found the footage. It was a little past 3 in the morning when Lily's scream cut through the silence of the house. I was out of my chair and running before I was fully awake, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floor. I threw open her bedroom door and found her sitting up in bed, her face wet with tears, her small hand pointing at the window. "He was there, Mommy. He was waving at me." I looked at the window. The blinds were closed, just like I had left them. I pulled them aside and looked out into the darkness. Nothing. The yard was empty. The street was quiet. Whoever had been there was already gone. I held Lily until she stopped shaking. I sang to her, the same lullaby I had sung since she was a baby. I told her she was safe, that Mommy was here, that nothing bad would happen. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew they might not be true. The next morning, I checked the security cameras. At 3:41 a.m., Glenn Whitmore appeared on the footage. He walked along the side of the house just like he had done a dozen times before. But this time, when he reached Lily's window, He didn't just stand there. He pressed his palm flat against the glass. He stayed like that for almost 5 minutes, his hand on the window, his face inches from where my daughter was sleeping. Something inside me snapped. I called my brother Tomas before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring, still half asleep, and I told him everything. The footage, the footprints, the police refusing to help, my suspicions about Glenn, and what had happened last night. By the time I finished, his voice had changed from groggy to furious. "I'm coming over," he said, "and I'm bringing equipment." "What kind of equipment?" "Better cameras, motion lights, whatever we need to catch this guy properly." He arrived 2 hours later with bags full of supplies. We spent the entire day installing new cameras with higher resolution and wider angles. We added motion sensor lights along the side of the house that would flood the yard with brightness at the slightest movement. Tomas even installed a camera directly above Lily's window, hidden behind a piece of trim where no one would notice it. While we worked, I told him my plan. The police said they couldn't act unless Glenn escalated, so I was going to give them evidence they couldn't ignore. I was going to catch him clearly on camera, document everything, and build a case so strong that they would have no choice but to arrest him. "And what if he does something before we get enough evidence?" Tomas asked. "That's why I'm sending the kids to Mom's house. They'll stay there until this is over." That evening, I packed bags for Lily and Oscar. I told Lily we were going on a little vacation to Grandma's house. She was excited, bouncing around the living room, asking if Grandma would make her special pancakes in the morning. Oscar just babbled happily, oblivious to everything. I hugged them both longer than usual when my mother came to pick them up. "Are you sure about this?" my mother asked as she loaded the kids into her car. "I'm sure. I can't protect them and catch him at the same time. They need to be somewhere safe. And what about you?" "I'll be fine. Tomas is going to check on me every day, and I have the cameras recording everything." She looked at me with worried eyes, but didn't argue. She knew me well enough to know I wouldn't change my mind. After they left, the house felt impossibly quiet. I walked through the empty rooms, checking locks, adjusting cameras, making sure everything was ready. I talked to Dolores across the street and told her what was happening. Her face went pale, but she promised to keep an eye on things and call me if she saw anything suspicious. The next day, I ran into Wesley, the young father who lived 3 houses down. We started chatting, and I mentioned that I was having some concerns about a neighbor. His expression changed immediately. "Is it Glenn Whitmore?" he asked. My heart skipped. "Why do you ask?" He asked me some weird questions a few weeks ago, wanted to know which houses had young kids, asked how old my son was, what time he usually went to bed. I thought it was strange, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I felt sick. This wasn't random. Glenn had been gathering information about families with children. He had been planning this. That night, I sat in the dark living room with my phone in my hand, watching the camera feeds. The house was silent. The street was empty. The motion lights stood ready, waiting for movement. I was done being afraid. I was done waiting for someone else to protect my family. If the police wouldn't stop Glenn Whitmore, I would. I waited for 3 nights before he came back. The first 2 nights were quiet. I barely slept, sitting in the dark living room with my eyes fixed on my phone screen, watching the camera feeds cycle through every angle of my house. Every rustle of wind made me jump. Every car that drove past made my heart race. But Glenn never appeared. On the 4th night, I almost convinced myself that he had given up. Maybe he noticed the new cameras. Maybe he realized someone was watching him now. I was about to close my eyes for a few minutes when the motion sensor triggered at 3:08 a.m. I grabbed my phone and watched as a figure stepped into frame. It was him, Glenn Whitmore, wearing the same dark clothes and baseball cap I had seen in weeks of footage. He moved slowly along the fence line, staying low, heading toward the back of the house, toward Lily's window. The new motion lights flooded the yard with brightness the moment he stepped within range. He froze for a second, shielding his eyes, then kept moving like it didn't matter anymore, like he didn't care if he was seen. The camera above Lily's window captured everything. His face, clear as day. his hands reaching toward the glass, the way he pressed close and looked inside, even though the room was empty now. He didn't know my daughter wasn't there. He thought she was sleeping in that bed, and he had come to watch her anyway. Something inside me turned to steel. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I grabbed my phone and walked to the back door, my hands steady, my breathing calm. I stepped outside into the cold night air and walked around the side of the house. My phone held up and recording. Glenn heard me coming when I was about 20 feet away. He spun around, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. The motion light illuminated everything, casting harsh shadows across his face. He looked surprised at first, then confused, then something else entirely, something that made my skin crawl. "Why are you watching my daughter?" My voice came out stronger than I expected. I didn't sound afraid. I sounded angry. Glenn didn't answer. He just stood there, his eyes moving from my face to the phone in my hand. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out what to do next. "I have you on camera," I said. "Every night for the past month. The police are already on their way. This time they'll have everything they need." That wasn't entirely true. I hadn't called them yet, but I needed him to believe I had. Glenn took a step toward me and my heart lurched. I held my ground, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. "You don't understand," he said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, and that made it worse. I wasn't going to hurt her. I just like watching. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to scream. I wanted to attack him with my bare hands, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Stay where you are." Headlights swept across the yard as a truck pulled up to the curb. Tomas jumped out of the driver's side. Wesley emerged from the passenger seat. They had been parked down the street, waiting for my signal, and the motion lights had told them everything they needed to know. Glenn looked at the two men approaching and took a step backward. For a moment, I thought he might run. But then, Dolores appeared on her porch across the street, her phone raised, the flash indicating she was taking pictures. He was surrounded. There was nowhere to go. Tomas positioned himself between Glenn and the street. Wesley stood by the fence, blocking the other direction. I kept recording, making sure every second was captured. "The police are on their way," Tomas said. His voice was calm, but hard. "You're going to stand right there until they arrive." Glenn looked at each of us, one by one, and something in his expression shifted. The gentleness disappeared. What replaced it was cold and empty, like looking into the eyes of something that wasn't quite human. "She's a beautiful little girl," he said quietly. "You should be proud." Tomas lunged forward, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't. We need him to go to jail, not the hospital." The police arrived within minutes. 2 cars, lights flashing, pulling into the cul-de-sac like something out of a movie. I showed them everything. The weeks of footage, the clear images of Glenn's face, the recording I had just made. Wesley gave his statement about the strange questions Glenn had asked. Dolores showed them the photos she had taken. This time, there was no talk about technicalities, no suggestions about better lighting or no trespassing signs. They put Glenn in handcuffs and led him to the back of a patrol car. As they drove away, I finally let myself breathe. The investigation into Glenn Whitmore revealed more than I ever wanted to know. When police searched his house the next day, they found a collection that made seasoned detectives uncomfortable. Photographs of children from all over the neighborhood, taken with a long-range camera lens from distances no one would notice. Some were of kids playing in their yards. Some were taken through windows. At least a dozen were of Lily. They also found a journal, page after page of handwritten notes, documenting the routines of families on our street. What time parents left for work, what time children went to bed, which houses had dogs, which houses had security cameras. He had been studying us like a scientist studies lab rats, learning our patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, waiting for the right moment. The prosecutor told me later that they also found equipment in his closet: rope, duct tape, a lockpicking kit, things that suggested he wasn't planning to just watch forever. When I heard that, I had to sit down because my legs wouldn't hold me anymore. I kept thinking about how close we had come, how many nights he stood outside my daughter's window, working up the courage to do something worse. Glenn was charged with stalking, criminal trespassing, and possession of materials consistent with intent to commit a violent crime. He pleaded guilty to avoid a trial, which meant Lily never had to testify. That was the one small mercy in all of this. He was sentenced to 7 years in prison with mandatory psychiatric evaluation before any possibility of parole. 7 years. It felt like both too much and not enough at the same time. The kids stayed with my mother for almost 3 months while I figured out what to do next. I tried to go back to normal life at first. I went back to work. I cleaned the house. I told myself that Glenn was gone and we were safe now. But every time I walked past Lily's window, I saw his handprint on the glass. Every time I heard a noise at night, I was back in that yard, watching him turn around with those empty eyes. I couldn't stay in that house. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place where something terrible had almost happened. I put it on the market in March and sold it within 3 weeks. We moved to a new neighborhood on the other side of the city, a gated community with security cameras at every entrance, and neighbors who actually look out for each other. The house is smaller, but it has a big backyard where Lily and Oscar can play. It has motion lights on every corner and an alarm system that I check twice before bed every night. Lily doesn't talk about the nightman anymore. I took her to see a child therapist for a few months, just to make sure she was processing everything okay. The therapist said kids are remarkably resilient, and that Lily seemed to be adjusting well. She still draws pictures of our family, but there's no figure in the window anymore. Just me, her, Oscar, and sometimes Grandma or Uncle Tomas. She started kindergarten in the fall. On her first day, she held my hand as we walked up to the school entrance, then turned and looked at me with a serious expression. "Mommy, if I see anything weird, I'll tell you right away. I promise." I knelt down and hugged her so tight she giggled and told me I was squishing her. "That's exactly right, baby. You always tell Mommy, no matter what." I've changed in ways that are hard to explain. I notice things I never paid attention to before. The car that drives past twice in 1 hour, the person who lingers a little too long near the playground, the neighbor who seems a little too interested in other people's business. I'm not paranoid, but I'm aware. There's a difference. I also learned to trust my daughter. When Lily first told me about the nightman, I dismissed it as imagination. I told myself kids make things up, that there was nothing to worry about. If I had listened sooner, if I had checked those cameras the first time she mentioned him, I might have caught Glenn weeks earlier. I might have stopped him before he stood outside her window with his palm pressed against the glass. Kids see things, adults miss. They notice patterns we overlook. And sometimes, the monsters they describe aren't hiding under the bed. Sometimes they're standing in the window, waiting to be believed. I think about that night a lot. The motion lights flooding the yard, Glenn's face caught perfectly on camera, Tomas and Wesley showing up exactly when I needed them, Dolores on her porch with her phone raised. It took a whole community to stop one man. I couldn't have done it alone, and I'm grateful every day that I didn't have to. Glenn Whitmore will be in prison for at least 5 more years. After that, I don't know what happens. Maybe he gets out and moves somewhere else. Maybe he finds another quiet street with another family that doesn't know what he is. That thought keeps me up some nights. But I also know that I did everything I could. I protected my children. I gathered the evidence. I made sure he couldn't hurt anyone else, at least not for a long time. And if he ever comes near my family again, I'll be ready, because I'm not the same person I was before. I'm a mother who learned the hard way that safety isn't something you assume, it's something you fight for. If you want more stories, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from.